We are live. Adam, thank you very much for joining me. There's so much to talk about, I don't even know where to begin. But why don't we just kick off with the latest on Sean Combs, because I gather that the defense asked for a mistrial today and were denied, right? And it's to do with fingerprints, right, around the 2012 car bombing, right, of the rapper
Correct.
Kid Cudi. How do you say it? I'm the
Kid
wrong
Cudi, yeah,
person to talk about this.
short for Scott Mescudi. Now, this is an important issue in the case, and full disclosure, though I wasn't in court today, I have been following the news quite closely, and I was in court for a lot of the setup to today's developments. Now, the reason why it was so important, and the reason why the defense requested a mistrial today, was because as everyone knows, Sean Combs is charged with racketeering and sex trafficking. And what the request was essentially about was over one of the alleged racketeering acts, which is arson. What the
Mhm.
witnesses who were speaking today were trying to fortify is the allegation that Sean Combs essentially firebombed the car of Scott Mescudi, better known professionally as Kid Cudi, and who testified. I saw his testimony. He always suspected that the person who firebombed his car, there was a Molotov cocktail in his Porsche. The jury saw it, the public saw it. The photographs are out there if anyone watching this live stream wants to look at it. Uh, he always suspected that it was Sean Combs who did it. And there are reasons why he strongly suspected it. Everyone knew because Sean Combs apparently told a lot of people, according to the testimony, he's going to kill Kid Cudi because he was jealous that Kid Cudi was having this relationship with the star witness Cassie Ventura. Uh, but no one saw the firebombing. There's no footage of the firebombing. No one was ever charged with the firebombing, which is why the witnesses today were called to fortify this act. And remember, to find Sean Combs guilty of racketeering, and that's the most serious
Yeah,
charge against him, that's a charge that can put him away for life. They need to
yeah,
find one of two racketeering acts. Let me just read out a portion from the indictment just so folks can understand uh, just how big this issue is. Members and associates of the Combs enterprise engaged in or attempted to engage in, among other activities, sex trafficking, forced labor, interstate transportation for purposes of prostitution, coercion, and enticement to engage in prostitution, narcotics offenses, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. This goes to arson. And you have a
right,
couple of witnesses, including Cassie Ventura, went on the witness stand and said that Sean Combs threatened to blow up Kid Cudi's car. Lo and behold, in 2012, his car gets blown up. There are no witnesses to this. So we have the investigators getting called in to testify. They confirm, yes, this was an arson. There was a firebomb, which one of the witnesses apparently said was done with an old English bottle and a fancy handkerchief that
right,
it was too fancy for its own purposes because the silk got in the way of it being a much more destructive event. It blew up the car instead of the car and the house, according to the Washington
right.
Post's reporting of this. And this what the mistrial request was all about is there was one seeming inconsistency with this, whereas there was an understanding that some of the DNA came from a female profile. Now, that would not suggest that it was Sean Combs. And one of the things that came out during testimony was that some of the fingerprint profiles were allegedly destroyed. Now, that issue was not allowed to go up in court. Sean Combs's lawyer says you can't unring the bell, and because it's such a crucial issue that it poisons a jury pool, and he requested a mistrial. and
So wait,
that
Adam,
was over.
let me just say that ask you that again, so because so that I'm clear. So the 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 prosecution called a law enforcement and investigator witness who said that there had been fingerprints that had been destroyed. Did they imply whose fingerprints they were?
Now, I didn't actually watch the testimony, but according to the reports indicate they did not make any such implication, but it's this sort of the parties were not supposed to go into the fingerprints.
Right,
That this was an issue that was not supposed to be part of this investigator's testimony.
right,
The and so the testimony that came out were that some fingerprints were destroyed in August of 2012.
right,
Now, that was what caused the call for a mistrial. The and that was quickly denied, according to the reporting that
right,
came out of the courtroom. But just to put this into perspective, the reason why the defense is fighting this one so hard is that if they believe an arson takes place, they're the prosecution is halfway to one of the prongs of racketeering.
right.
And we're talking, especially when one of the prongs is narcotics offenses. Well, there's been ample testimony that of the MDMA being used during the freak offs. Kidnapping, we had one of the major witnesses. I saw her very emotional testimony, Capricorn Clark,
Yeah.
alleging that she was kidnapped by Sean Combs. There are
Two, two,
all of
two,
these.
two take part in this. The two take part,
Correct.
right, in this firebombing. So there's a lot. So there is, as you say, there's a huge amount for the government's case of racketeering dependent on this.
Right. Right. Her testimony was that she was forced into a car, into Diddy's car when he was holding a gun, and they were going to go to Kid Cudi's house. So there's a lot hanging on it, as you said, Vicky. There's the kidnapping, arson. We heard evidence of bribery already with when we spoke last time. The big stack of bills paid to a hotel security guard at the
Mhm.
time who had witnessed all of the aftermath of the assault on Kathy Ventura. Now, domestic violence is now admitted by the defense. The defense is essentially he's a domestic abuser, but that's not racketeering, that's not sex
Right.
trafficking.
That's not
But
what this trial is about. Yeah.
correct.
And so
And
it's, yeah. I think it's fascinating. And as you know, as you said last week, I think very rightly, this is going to come down to who the jury believes, because, you know, he makes this case that it was all consensual. And I believe there have been these text messages and so it comes down to a jury making a judgment.
right. And it comes down to corroboration. You had this star
Yep.
stylist on the witness stand today saying that Cassie Ventura didn't like the freak offs. So that's the time when all of the corroboration becomes so important. So if you believe Sean Combs that, oh, it wasn't me, it was that Kid Cudi testified that he believed it was Sean Combs. There was this memorable testimony where they're staying at the a fancy hotel. They're meeting at a fancy hotel in Los Angeles, and Sean Combs is standing by a window, and Scott Mescudi, Kid Cudi, says that Sean Combs is looking out the window as if he's a Marvel supervillain. And that is the time when Combs denies having any. He asks him, "Hey, what are we going to do about the car?" Because they work out the jealousy with Ventura, and Combs looks him dead in the eye and says, "I don't know what you're talking about." So there's going to be a lot. I expect that a lot of when we finally get to closing arguments, there's going to be a lot of litigating of what do we know and what do we know beyond a reasonable doubt. And I
Right.
expect, like, you and I have attended a lot of trials. And at the end, the judge usually gives the same sort of speech about what circumstantial evidence is. And the analogy they always use is someone walks into the courtroom and they're shaking their umbrella and water comes off of it. It's circumstantial evidence says that it's raining. It's the go-to analogy that the judges always say when they're assessing what's circumstantial evidence, what's direct evidence. And I expect that what's going to happen during closing arguments is that you're going to have the prosecutor saying that even if there wasn't a direct witness to the firebombing of the car, you have you have the testimony from Cassie Ventura that he said he was going to blow up the car. The car
Yeah.
gets blown up. We have witnesses saying that there was this Molotov cocktail. We know the composition of the cocktail. You had other witness talking about this vendetta with Mescudi. And so, that I think that is going to be, we're seeing that line being drawn right now. And that's why I'm not surprised that the first mistrial motion in the case comes to this issue, because it's
Yeah.
a big sign saying, hey, this is an important issue, pay attention to this.
Right. Well, we stand by, because I'm assuming that when, do you know when the prosecution wraps up and the defense begins?
Not clear, but I do understand that they appear to be making very good progress.
Right.
That it was originally intended to be an 8-week trial. It's going to be a lot less than that now. And so there's going to be another alleged victim testifying soon, Mia. She's been spoken about in court, according to the reports today. So I wouldn't be surprised if this moves a lot more quickly than we originally expected. We originally expected a 2-month trial, and it's shaping up to be much less than that.
Fascinating. All right. Well, we'll come back to that next week, I suspect. But now, Trump.
Right.
I mean, it's hard to know where to begin. I love that you call it the Trump docket. I really want to talk about Harvard, but I think it's probably important to touch on some other things, right? So the Wilmer Hale, important victory for the law firm today, right? The third law firm who the Trump administration, who the courts are saying no to Trump's executive order. You cannot sanction this law firm. And Wilmer Hale was on Trump's bad list, to put it nicely, because of the work they did in the Mueller investigation, all right, or Robert Mueller's there. So tell me what you make of that.
Well, the judges are seeing uniformly just how much of a threat this is to the rule of law, and they're framing it as such that essentially when the executive targets a law firm based explicitly on who they associate with, it's no surprise that all 3 of these law firms had a injunction blocking the executive orders and summary judgment blocking these executive orders as violations of the First Amendment, the right to for speech and association. Who they associate with? Do they associate with Robert Mueller, as happened with Wilmer Hale? Were they associating with Andrew Weissman in the Jenner and Block litigation? In each of the cases, Trump's executive order is quite explicit. We are targeting this law firm because it is involved with these people that Trump does not like. And in each case, the judges are releasing uncommonly furious rulings. I'll give you an example. This ruling on the Wilmer Hale case, I've never seen anything like it. A judge used the exclamation point 26 times, 27 if you count the time he's quoting Trump.
I've never seen that.
I've never seen that. Usually, everything a federal judge writes carries an explicit exclamation point. I am ordering something. If you don't follow this order, you're going to be in violation of a court's order. They don't need the exclamation point because the rulings speak for themselves. But in this case, the first paragraph, there was the first exclamation point was after the sentence, "The framers knew this." And so he's invoking the framers of the Constitution.
Yeah.
And the next exclamation point was saying that in blocking this order that he's following the vision of the framers of the Constitution, exclamation point. There were parts where he was addressing the arguments of Wilmer Hale's lawyers and said, "I agree," exclamation point. He addressed one of the government's arguments with "please," exclamation point, and "please, that dog won't hunt." The
But so
exasperation.
Adam, so let me just stop you there because I'm just thinking about what you're saying. It's really interesting. So he's talking about the framers of the Constitution.
Right.
And what's really interesting about this, so originalism, right, which is the leading ideology of the majority of the judges on the Supreme Court, is about, right, putting yourself in the position of what would the framers intended. What, when you interpret the law, you try and interpret it in the way that the framers intended it to be interpreted. So in a way, this judge is leaning into a sort of conservative framework.
100%. I mean, there's nothing more faithful to the Constitution to say than saying the executive cannot discriminate against a law firm based on their speech and advocacy, cannot tell the clients of said law firm, your lawyers can't walk into the government buildings because of a vendetta of the president, that a punishment can be meted out surely just solely by the president's decree rather than any sort of formal process that's guaranteed in the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution or the Sixth Amendment Sixth Amendment of the Constitution guaranteeing people their right to the counsel of their choosing, which these executive orders deprive. This is something that the judges are uniformly finding. And I should be clear, Richard Leon, who wrote the ruling with Wilmer Hale, he's a George W. Bush appointee, rather conservative attorney. I haven't seen too many exclamation points, let alone 26 exclamation points in any of his rulings previously. I think the tenor and the substance of the rulings follows just how extraordinary an attack on law firms this is. This isn't something that typically happens. There's another ruling by a different judge blocking a similar executive order that quoted Shakespeare, and in particular Dick the Butcher's "First thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers." And she put that widely misunderstood quote in the proper context, that this was in the context of a mob, that Shakespeare put it in the mouth of a bloodthirsty mob that wanted to destroy the rule of law. And so that she wanted to highlight that to attack the lawyers, to attack the rule of law itself, is the first step toward tyranny. So this is the framework with which the judges are adopting it. Now, only 3 of the 4 rulings have come down yet, but I would be shocked if the 4th ruling were anything different. And I can
Right.
tell you from my having covered oral arguments in that case, it won't be different. And on appeal, I would absolutely be shocked if there were any different result. It's just such an open and shut issue because if you look at the text of these executive orders, it announces the vendetta in black and white. You're reading it. As a matter of fact, there was an analogy used by this judge, Judge Leon, in the ruling. He compared these executive orders to a gumbo, and that the first section of the executive order is the roux, and by which he means that the beginning of these orders announces the vendetta against and the rest of the sections are the punishment, and that the roux gets into everything, and the
Wow.
entire concoction gives him heartburn. I have a feeling
That's a great metaphor. That's fabulous. That is
Yeah.
fabulous. You probably enjoyed writing that. Um,
Oh yes.
so, well, I think that is what is so interesting. I mean, I'm sure you get asked this all the time, and I get asked this all the time. And Andrew Weissman, who we both know, gets asked it all the time, is, how the courts, does the system hold, right, under
Right.
what some people see as an attack on democracy, or an attack of the way that our government, I'm an American, I know I don't sound like one, is founded. And so far, I mean, the courts seem to be standing. Let me ask you, I know that you were interested in this, the plane of criminals. I mean, they are violent criminals that was sent to South Sudan, which is obviously
Right.
a dangerous, war-torn place. And it's been stopped, but they didn't have any due process, was the problem, right? And so
That's
it's
exactly the
been
case.
stopped in Djibouti, where there is an American base. Djibouti's on the horn. I never thought I would have to talk about Djibouti again. Djibouti was a place where Jeffrey Epstein did business, on the tip of. It has the largest, deepest deep water port in the world. So
Mhm.
it's a haven for smugglers. But anyway, this is where these guys, right, are currently stalled because a court has said they're not to be sent on to South Sudan. Right, there's now the courts are demanding due process. So do we
Right.
know any more than that?
We do. So the latest development in that case today was that the Supreme Court, that the Trump administration just last night tried to overturn, or at least get a stay of, the judge's order uh, at the Supreme Court. And it went to the circuit justice of the First Circuit, who is Justice Jackson. And Justice Jackson read the application that says we want an immediate stay and said, okay, we'll hear a response by June 4th. So
Yeah,
there's
right.
not going to be an immediate stay because there isn't really a case here. Let's take a little step back here as to why Justice Jackson might not be in a rush. The judge in the case, and I listened in on the hearing last week, Judge Murphy, the reason why they are in Djibouti is that Judge Murphy did not order the government to send the men on that plane back to the United States. He could have. He gave the government the option to said either way we have a 9-0 majority of the Supreme Court saying everyone is entitled to due process. You can give them due process in Djibouti, where they will need to do what is known as a reasonable fear interview. And that means they need to uh, be questioned about whether they fear coming to harm if they are sent to South Sudan, where a fragile peace treaty collapsed
Mm.
recently and is in the grip of war and is a notoriously human rights abusing nation that they're not from. So they need to be given a chance to see if they're afraid of that. And if they're afraid of that, the Constitution demands that they're not sent there. So let's take a step back further. The question is not whether people who have been convicted of serious crimes, and some of the men on the plane, as you rightly point out, were convicted of crimes that involved
That violent
murder, some
crimes. Yeah.
violent crimes, sex trafficking, not all of them, but some of them. Um, Now, the question is, do you just send them to any human rights abusing nation where the president shakes the hand of the despot? Or is there some sort of orderly process where you can assert your rights under the Convention Against Torture, for example, if you have a reasonable fear that you might be tortured in South Sudan or El Salvador or any other place on the map where the administration wants to enter into an agreement with a strongman ruler? Um, or do we have a free for all where the government calls the shots and picks a dot on a map, and without any notice or due process, there you go? And what judges are saying, and this is a uniform uh, verdict from every level of court that has heard this issue so far says no, the Fifth Amendment still exists. This Fifth Amendment is actually quite clear. Due process applies to all, not there is no exception of this person is really bad, and there's certainly not an exception of this person is a citizen or not a citizen. That's not a clause in the Fifth Amendment. It says all persons. So this is what this is why I suspect, although she did not explain her reasoning, Justice Jackson isn't in a rush because this isn't a very serious application. The government is in effect appealing the compromise that they struck with a judge who declined to actually order them to take the men back to the United States.
Right. It's going to be fascinating to see what happens, because there they are in limbo right now. And, well, I guess we'll come back and talk about that on June the 4th.
I look forward to it.
Yeah. So, all right. As an aside, we're now going to talk about Harvard, but I will just say the other thing, of course, that has happened in the last 24 hours are the pardons. I actually met Savannah Chrisley, the daughter of the reality TV show couple who had been sent to prison for fraud and were just pardoned by Trump. I have, on the grounds, quote unquote, they didn't look like terrorists, apparently. And I met her a few weeks ago in Washington, and she actually told me I obviously don't watch the right TV shows because I have no idea who her parents were, but she told me they had gone, they'd been in prison because Fulton County was so corrupt. So anyway, I feel like that we will be reporting on that. We ought to be reporting on who they are and what happened there sooner rather than later. Harvard.
Right.
Okay, so, I mean, this is head spinning, right? Absolutely head spinning, where we've got to. So Harvard is using, am I right, that in terms of Harvard's legal defense against everything that's going on, they are again citing free speech, First Amendment.
Absolutely.
That is the mainstay of their argument. So just walk us through where we are, because I mean this thing has escalated, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when the Department of Homeland Security ordered Harvard, to stop the international students, right? A federal judge put in a restraining order. That's correct? Which I'd never. I mean, that's
right.
Extraordinary. And now the administration has asked for a list of all the international students, claiming they could be terrorists, I guess. So I mean, from a legal point of view, where are we and what happens next?
So we're early on in the process, but we're going to be speeding down further very soon. As you noted, there's a restraining order blocking that extraordinary action by Trump, and there's, you can draw a line between what's happening to the law firms and what's happening to Harvard. That if you fall on Trump's bad side, there are these consequences. And put it into greater perspective, the New York Times has done a tally of the number of times courts have taken some action, at least temporarily blocking Trump administration action. That number is now above 170, but I haven't checked today, so it might be significantly higher. This particular case is heading toward a hearing toward the end of the week on the preliminary injunction arguments. So a judge will be considering the final outcome sooner than later. This is already that this falls in the context of the government trying to justify this in the name of combating anti-Semitism. That has fallen apart in other ways, but you noted that they're looking for information on these students. The information is being requested, as I understand it, by the Department of Homeland Security,
Yes.
uh, and we know that and so that there's this entire um, it comes in this context of a clampdown on education. Just before we connected, there was a new ruling in the case of Mahmoud Khalil, where a judge found that it was a mixed ruling for him, but a certain part of the order said that Marco Rubio's determination that he represented some sort of um, uh, threat to national interests was he'd likely prove that that was unconstitutional, and there might be some issue with his green card. And we've seen a lot of other rulings in cases involving these students where there have been cleaner victories for the students, finding a just a plain First Amendment um, uh, argument and a First Amendment victory by the students, that this is retaliation for the perceived, often unstated perceived views of the students. You're absolutely right that one of the central claims that Harvard is making is violation of the First Amendment, but there's also a law that we're seeing in a lot of these cases. I'm looking at their lawsuit now. That's what I'm turning to. The Administrative Procedure Act. And for folks who are listening in who might not be familiar with it, many of the cases are being challenged under the Administrative Procedure Act because what that law does is that it stops a government from taking an arbitrary or capricious action. It basically helps ensure, Congress created it to help ensure that the government doesn't just do what it wants as a kind of capricious, vindictive outcome. So there's the constitutional claims, that's the core of the lawsuit, the First Amendment, but there's also this greater thread we're seeing in all of these cases that you have to follow some sort of procedure. You can't just say that Harvard is bad because we don't because we perceive that they hold these views and they have students who engaged in this protest that we dislike. There has to be a reason that's reasonably tailored to the action. You don't just stop full on any international student from being part of the university with all the ramifications that might mean for the US economy, for the brain drain in the United States, without saying that any particular interest that you're trying to, any goal you're trying to meet, that this advances a goal. So I think
Well,
that there
this
are
is
two.
so I understand that when it comes to the Department of Homeland Security suddenly trying to rout out all the international students. But separate from that, right, this all stemmed from the fact, right, that Trump froze government funds, right, to Harvard. And I mean, in some ways, when you look back to the genesis of this, I mean, the whole thing seems, I mean, there was a moment when there was a back and forth where the Trump administration, somebody said that the letter that was sent to Harvard that was so inflammatory was sort of was a mistake. Somebody had sent it erroneously, and it was, and so to think that we are now at, DEFCON 5, if someone sent a letter by mistake, I mean, it seems absurd. But
Right.
so what you're saying though is, I think that even when the government freezes, I mean, it was 2.2 billion, and then there was another, I think, 100 million. That the courts, Harvard still has the right to go to say, well, wait a minute, you can't do that without an argument. Is that right?
Essentially, and through a process. One of the areas of coverage that I've been doing a lot recently is the Federal Register's notice and comment process. I did a story very recently about a Trump administration rule revoking the a rule that had blocked the Office of Refugee Resettlement from stopping unaccompanied children from having sponsors based on immigration status of the sponsors. The Trump administration just ended that. And there's a lawsuit challenging it. It's coming up to a head soon. And through the notice and comment process, the general public can come in and say, hey, wait a minute, have you thought about this outcome that some of the, in this case, the unaccompanied children, their parents might also not be full citizens. They might also be undocumented, and you're keeping them, you're finding essentially a backdoor to family separation. That's what a process that the Administrative Procedure Act guarantees. And that's where we're seeing a lot of these challenges. It's the same thing you talked about funding. That's a very important issue. There was another case just like it about $20 billion in funding to green banks that were passed by Congress, one of Joe Biden's biggest legislative accomplishments. The Trump administration tried to end it, claiming that there was fraud. Well, they went to court. They said, no, we're not alleging fraud, in something that had a curious echo to the 2020 presidential election. But one of the questions in that case is, was there a process here other than the Trump administration yanking funding because the Trump administration wants to stop it? Does it go beyond that? Is there anything once? And remember, this is congressionally appropriated money.
Right.
So there's a separation of powers issue there, and that's currently a live case. So we're seeing threads. I know that I keep talking about various different cases, but it's all part of a similar theme here because, as I said, more than 170 rulings against the Trump administration, largely because the same issues keep popping up,
Yeah.
like trying to shut down an agency created by Congress, trying to stop funding that was appropriated by Congress for a certain program or a certain grant or educational institutions. It's a very, I call it the Trump docket because it's a big,
Yeah.
sprawling beast, quite frankly.
Well, I
But
think it's going to be fascinating, I think, when we get to the midterms, because, I certainly hear, I mean, we live in sort of liberal New York, but I hear among people who voted for Trump that even if they agree with some of his policy positions, the way in which, the very autocratic way in which he seems to be going about trying to achieve them is backfiring. And I'll be curious to see what that does to his support come the midterms.
I think that's right. I think that a lot of folks have an implicit sense of fairness, have an implicit sense of what is the way we do things as a nation, who we are, what we stand for, who our allies are, who our allies are not. And I think that the previous several months have, it feels like several months, have shaken that very core identity. Now, whether that plays out in the midterms or whether just a simple failure of a lot of these policies and
Yes.
there's a and Lawrence O'Donnell talked about this on his show last night, a acronym going around Wall Street called TACO.
Oh, yes, I love this. Yes.
Trump always
Tell
chickens
everyone
out.
listening. Go on, say it again, Adam, what it stands for.
TACO is short for Trump always chickens out. And they're talking
Yeah.
about the tariff policy here that Wall Street says, okay, he's going to back down. And by the way, it's being challenged in the court. And even if he didn't back down, it's having listened to some of these hearings, it seems quite likely that the courts might find that illegal too. And
The
as one of the
tariffs.
commented, yeah, and as because that's the Congress has the ability to set tariffs, and the legal rationale that he's using for this, essentially a sanctions legislation, doesn't mention tariffs. Um,
No, I
so,
will tell you,
so
I'm sure you read this. I saw it today. Trump went berserk when asked about Trump always chickens out in a
he
press
did.
briefing today. He went absolutely berserk. And I think, and he talked about, well, it's all about how you negotiate. And actually, I wrote a book about the world of New York real estate in 2014. And, I think what you're seeing, the way in which he's approaching all of these things, which is to act first and then wait for the legal ramifications, is how the very kind of unregulated, ruthless world of real estate works. I mean, they all sue each
Right.
other, and and then, or that they do something and then wait for the law to catch up to them. And that, I think, is exactly what we're seeing. It's just that until now, no one's ever applied that methodology to
To
the White
government.
House. Yes, exactly.
It's
So
wild.
that
And
you know,
I'm sorry.
it's very familiar to me. Well, I mean, Adam, that is a lot to cover. And we haven't, I mean, we could talk on and on, because I also think that the pardons are just extraordinary.
I do too.
More to come. But I think we should reconvene next week. There will be more
I
in the Sean
agree.
Combs trial, and we haven't even touched on Harvey Weinstein's retrial, which is also ticking along in the background, and I suspect will come to an end in the next few weeks.
Right.
We shall see.
Absolutely. One of the most interesting things about that is just how little attention that it's getting. It's so subsumed by the news cycle that I think the amount of attention that it's getting is indicative of perhaps where the culture has gone. But yeah, no,
Yeah, no, I
that
think that's really. I think that is a whole other fascinating conversation to be had. It is indicative of where the culture has gone, and he had a very sympathetic interview with Candace Owens, and I mean, it's going to be fascinating to see how that shakes out. I did just see a headline out of the corner of my eye that I think he had a moment. Somebody testified, and he Harvey Weinstein was unwell or something in the courtroom. But that is due to wrap up maybe as soon as next week. So we shall come back and talk about it. I want to
sounds
say thank
good.
you very much, Adam. I really appreciate your insights and your time.
Thank you very much too. I always enjoy our conversations. Look forward to the next time.
Absolutely. Take care.
You too.